The woman stepped up, onto the platform, and the whole square went quiet, the kind of quiet that follows a hammer being drawn back. There was no gun. Only a wooden box painted white, sitting there in the sun. Painted white, like that made it decent. The wind came down off the flats carrying red dust, and the smell of 3 years without rain. It settled on the shoulders of the men crowded in on either side. Nobody spoke. Nobody quite looked at anybody else. She held her spine straight, as a fence post. Because if she let it go slack, even for a second, the thing underneath would come apart, and she'd sooner die than let this town watch that happen. At the edge of the crowd, someone set down a silver coin worn smooth on both faces. A horse threw its head, and backed up a step. The mayor's smile stopped halfway to finished. His hand went into the bowl. His fingers closed around a slip of paper folded in 4. The wind got here before the people did. It always did. Rolled down off the flats, with nothing to stop it, no trees left standing, no crops to catch the dust, just bare red earth, and the bones of a town that used to believe in rain. Ashford Flat. Population shrinking. Hope shrinking faster. 3 years without a real storm. 3 years of watching the creek bed crack into a jigsaw puzzle nobody wanted to solve. Men who used to talk about cattle now talked about debt. Women who used to talk about weddings now talked about which family would be next to pack a wagon and leave for California, or Oregon, or anywhere that still had green in it. And when a town runs out of water long enough, it runs out of shame too. That's how you get a bride lottery. Nobody remembers whose idea it was first. That's the thing about ugly ideas. They don't need a father once they take hold. One day it was a joke somebody made outside the saloon. Next month it was a wooden box sitting on a platform in the town square, painted white, like that made it decent. A silver dollar bought a man a ticket. The prize was a woman. Not gold. Not land. A woman, usually one whose husband had died, or whose family had drowned in tax debt, so deep there was no swimming out. The town called it charity. Called it mercy. Called it a solution. Adeline Hargrove called it what it was. A sale. She stood in the lineup, that morning with 4 other women, her spine straight, as a fence post, her jaw set, so tight it ached. Because if she let it soften, even for a second, she was afraid the whole thing underneath would come apart. And she could not, would not, let this town see her come apart. 26 years old. Widowed 2 years now. Once a schoolteacher, chalk dust permanent under her fingernails, voice trained to carry across a room full of restless children, without ever needing to shout. Now just another name folded up, and dropped into a box like a raffle ticket at a county fair. Except this wasn't a fair. This was Tuesday. She scanned the crowd. Faces she'd known her whole life. Faces that used to nod to her in church. Now they just watched. Some of them almost apologetic. Most of them not even that. Which was worse, she'd decided. The cruelty, or the shrugging. Mayor Cyrus Pruitt climbed the platform steps like a man who owned every board under his boots. Silver watch chain. Black coat too heavy for the heat, like he wanted everyone sweating but him. He held up the carved bowl, turned it so the morning sun caught the brass fittings, made sure everyone saw it shine. Now, folks. His voice always had that oiled sound to it. Like it had been poured, not spoken. The rules are simple. Every man who bought a ticket gets one chance to win himself a fine woman. A laugh rolled through the crowd. Sharp. Jagged at the edges. And remember. Pruitt smiled. No refunds. More laughter. Adeline didn't laugh. Couldn't feel her own hands. Her eyes went to the box, then away from it, then back again, because staring felt like begging, and looking away felt like giving up, and she didn't know which one she hated more. That's when the crowd went quiet. Not slow. Not gradual. All at once. Like somebody had cut a rope holding all the noise up, and it just dropped. She followed their stares to the edge of the square. A man. Tall enough that he didn't need to push through the crowd. The crowd parted for him on its own, the way water moves around a rock it's afraid to touch. Black hair loose past his shoulders. Bare chest under a fringed leather vest, sun-darkened skin marked here and there with old scars, thin white lines like something had tried to write a story on him, and he'd survived every word of it. An Apache. Somebody near Adeline whispered it like a curse. That's the one from the ridge. Another voice. Lower. Tocho. She knew the name the way you know a story you've only heard secondhand. The warrior who lived alone in the Red Canyons, miles from his own people, further still from the town. Some said he'd fought in the border wars. Some said he'd lost everything in them. Family. Home. Whatever a man needs to still call himself part of something. Some said something in him broke that day and never got put back together. He walked forward. Slow. Deliberate. Like time itself owed him the space to take his steps at his own pace, and he intended to collect. He stopped at the table. Set down one dull silver coin. Pruitt's smile didn't move. But something behind his eyes did. You can't, the mayor started. You said any man who pays. Tocho's voice cut through the square like a blade drawn slow enough for everyone to hear the metal sing. I'm a man. I'm paying. Silence. Real silence. Not the kind that follows a joke. The kind that follows a threat nobody's brave enough to name out loud. Pruitt's throat worked. Sweat slid down past his collar. He looked at the crowd like he expected somebody to back him up. Nobody did. Because nobody in that square wanted to be the one who told Tocho no to his face. So the mayor folded a ticket. Dropped it in the bowl. Let fate decide, he muttered. Like fate was something he still believed answered to him. He stirred the tickets. Reached in. Adeline watched his hand. That was all she could watch, that hand hovering over paper slips that held every remaining scrap of control she had left in this world. And something in her chest folded in on itself. Please. Not me. Please. Not. Pruitt pulled a slip free. Unfolded it, hands unsteady enough that the paper trembled before he even got the fold undone. His voice cracked reading it out loud, like he hadn't expected the weight of the name to land the way it did. Adeline Hargrove. The square erupted into murmurs. Adeline froze. Actually froze. Like her body had received the information, before her mind agreed to process it. She looked at the bowl. Looked at Pruitt. Looked, finally, at the man standing at the base of the platform steps, with a coin already spent, and no way to take it back. He didn't move at first. Then he did. Each step toward her measured. Silent. Certain, the way a man walks, when he already decided something a long time ago, and is only now getting around to doing it. The mayor's voice wavered, as he said the words the law required of him. By law. She belongs to him. The crowd broke into noise. Half of it outrage. Half of it something uglier, that wore outrageous clothes. A woman near the front cried out. He can't take her. It's a trick, someone else shouted. Pruitt's got something up his sleeve, I know it. But Tocho didn't look at any of them. He stopped in front of Adeline. His shadow fell over her, long and cool against the heat of the square, and he leaned down just enough that his words were meant for her alone. I entered to show them what it means to play with lives. A pause. Barely a breath long. But now your name is mine. Her voice came out smaller than she wanted it to. What will you do with me? He looked at her. Long enough that it stopped feeling like a stare, and started feeling like something closer to a question he was asking himself. What I must. That was all. 4 words, and somehow they carried more weight than every promise the mayor had made, from that platform in the last 3 years combined. The sun bled orange across the horizon, as they walked. Away from the square. Away from the noise. Away from a town that had just watched a woman get handed off like a sack of feed, and called it justice. Adeline didn't look back. Because if she looked back, she was afraid of what she'd see in her own face reflected in every window they passed. The canyon swallowed the road an hour past the last fence line. Rocky trail. Narrow enough in places, that Tocho's horse had to pick its way like it was reading the ground for a language only it understood. Adeline rode behind him, wrists bound loose, with rawhide, not cruel, she'd realized after the first mile, just practical. Something to keep her from sliding off, if the trail pitched. Small mercy. She hated that it felt like one. Her skirts were already torn at the hem. Bonnet gone somewhere back near the second creek crossing, lost to a low branch she hadn't seen coming. Every jolt of the saddle threw a fresh cloud of dust up her arms, into her hair, down the back of her collar, until she could taste the canyon in the back of her throat. She hadn't spoken since Ashford Flat. Fear does that. Clogs the throat up like silt in a well. Every sound out here felt bigger than it should. The cry of a hawk somewhere above the ridgeline. The groan of saddle leather shifting under her. Her own pulse, which she swore she could hear, over everything else, hammering out a rhythm, that said run, run, except there was nowhere to run to, and no way to get there even, if there had been. Tocho walked ahead in silence. Back straight. Step steady, unbothered by the terrain in a way that made her wonder how many times he'd walked this exact path before. He didn't look back at her. Didn't try to talk. His whole world seemed to exist somewhere she couldn't reach. Made of stone. Made of wind. Made of distance, that had nothing to do with miles. When the canyon narrowed to something barely wide enough for the horses, he stopped at a stream, and finally turned. Drink, he said. Simple. Almost an order, except there was no heat behind it. She hesitated. Waited for the mockery she was sure would follow. It didn't come. His face gave her nothing. Not cruelty. Not kindness either. Just quiet. She knelt by the water, cupped her hands, drank. The cold burned going down, sharp enough to feel real for the first time, since the square. Tocho crouched beside her, refilling his flask, not looking at her, when he spoke. You think I wanted this? She stiffened. Didn't you? You entered the lottery. You paid the coin. A low sound came out of him. Something between a laugh, and something that had given up on being a laugh halfway through. I paid to shame them. He looked up, and for the first time she saw something in his eyes that wasn't stone. Men who sell their women deserve to see the world turn their own game back on them. She turned to face him fully. Then why didn't you refuse, when they called my name? His eyes lifted. Dark. Steady. Reflecting the dying light like something that had learned a long time ago not to give away what it was thinking. Because the men who laughed would have dragged you off to whoever else won. Or worse. A pause, heavier this time. You were safer walking with me than left standing there. Her breath caught. Safer. With a man who could. I could. He said it, before she finished, quiet and grave. I won't. The honesty unsettled her more than any threat would have. She wanted to hate him. Wanted him to be simple. A villain. A savage. Something easy to file away, and be done with. But there was no malice behind his eyes. Only something hollow. Something old. They rode until nightfall. Coyotes somewhere out past the ridge. Stars coming up thick and close, the way they only do, when there's nothing man-made left to dim them. Tocho stopped at a small plateau, began building camp, with the kind of economy that told her this wasn't the first time. Fire first. Then the blanket, laid flat and square like he measured it, with his eyes, before he ever touched it. He untied the rawhide at her wrists, without a word. Set a piece of dried meat and bread near her. Eat. Rest. She stared at the food like it might be a trick too. You mean to keep me prisoner? He looked up from the fire. Something close to amusement crossed his face, gone as fast as it came. Prisoner. He repeated the word slow, testing its weight. No. A prisoner has walls. A pause. I have none to give you. That answer left her without a response. She turned it over in her mind long, after he'd gone quiet again, the way you turn over a stone looking for what's underneath it. Later, fire burned low, she watched him sharpen a blade in slow, deliberate strokes. Firelight caught the scars across his shoulders. Long faded lines. Battle. Pain. History written on skin, because there was nowhere else to put it. Without looking up, he spoke. You fear me. Not a question. You should. His hands didn't stop moving. I've done things no man should be proud of. A beat. But I've never harmed a woman. Not even when they called me beast for less. Then why live alone? The question left her mouth, before she could stop it. He paused. The blade went still in his hands. Because a man, with too much blood on his own hands shouldn't walk among the living. The words hung there. Heavy. Immovable, like something dropped into still water that refuses to ripple, just sinks and never hits bottom. She'd thought him proud. Savage. Something to be afraid of in the way children are afraid of the dark. An absence, not a person. What she saw now was grief. Old. Unhealed. Wearing a stranger's face, because it had nowhere else to go. He lay down a few feet from the fire. Sleep. Tomorrow we reach my land. There, you decide what comes next. She turned away from him. Sleep didn't come easy. A coyote cried somewhere far off, answered by another, farther still. She stared into the embers, and thought about the strange, quiet man beside her. The one who'd won her in a lottery, and then spoke like a ghost, who wanted nothing at all from the living world. And for the first time, since her name got pulled from that box, she wondered if fate had chosen her not as punishment, but as the start of something neither of them had meant to begin. Dawn came in cold. Bit at her cheeks the second she swung a leg over the horse. Tocho was already mounted. Silent, the way he always was. She'd started to understand that about him. Silence wasn't emptiness with this man. It was a language all its own, and she was only beginning to learn the alphabet. They rode. The canyon walls climbed higher on either side. Red rock catching the early light, turning the whole world the color of a wound just starting to heal. She kept glancing at him. Couldn't help it. Every angle of him looked carved out of the same stone that surrounded them. Muscles corded under sun-dark skin, scars pale in the light, eyes that always seemed to be looking past whatever was in front of them, out toward something only he could see. Where are we going? She finally asked. Her voice sounded small out here. Swallowed whole by all that open space. Somewhere safe. His horse didn't slow. Where the town can't follow. Where no one can claim you again. Safe. She let the word sit bitter on her tongue. Safe from them. Or from you? His jaw tightened. Both. Then, quieter, like he'd heard the doubt in her, before she'd even finished voicing it. I didn't enter that lottery to claim a bride. I entered it to shame the town. A breath. But now. You're mine by their law. Not mine by desire. That's all you need to know. Her hands tightened on the reins. I don't know if I can trust that. You could turn on me at any moment, she said. Kill me. Leave me out here to die in the rocks, and nobody would ever. I'm not your enemy. He cut in. Quiet. Final. Not unless you make me one. The words landed heavier than any threat could have. She wanted to believe them. Wanted to let herself hope, even a little. But fear doesn't let go that easy. It claws. It reminds you of every time believing cost you something you couldn't get back. Still. There was no cruelty in his voice. No mockery. Just the bare, quiet truth of a man who didn't waste words on lies. By midday they reached a narrow ridge. Below, a valley spread out. Red rock, twisted juniper, the glitter of a hidden stream cutting through like a vein of silver under skin. Tocho dismounted first. Helped her down, with a hand that was firm, but careful, guiding without gripping too tight, like he'd already learned exactly how much pressure a person could take, before it stopped feeling like help, and started feeling like control. You'll need to walk this part. He pointed toward a narrow path winding down the cliff face. Safer for the horses. She nodded. Swallowed both fear and pride, because out here she was starting to understand you couldn't afford much of either. They descended together. Not touching. Not talking, mostly. Just existing in the same stretch of narrowing canyon, and yet, she felt it. Some invisible tether stretched between them. Not trust. Not yet. But maybe the shape trust takes right, before it decides to exist. By the time they reached the valley floor, something in her chest had shifted. She'd survived the first full day beside this man. Nothing about her had been harmed. That shouldn't have felt like a victory. It did anyway. The cabin sat tucked behind a wall of boulders, half swallowed by shadow. Rough-hewn logs. A stone chimney, with smoke curling lazy into the evening sky, carrying the smell of burning pine out across the valley. This is where we'll rest, Tocho said. Not a question. In his world, she was learning, decisions got made to protect. Not to negotiate. Adeline studied the cabin's frame. Simple. Sturdy. No lock on the door. No chains beyond the leather strap he'd used on the ride, which he was already loosening, from her wrists, as they stood there. The outside world, cruel eyes, cruel judgment, a whole town, that had watched her get handed off like livestock, couldn't touch her here. But inside those walls, she was entirely in his hands. He helped her down the last stretch of trail. You may rest inside, he said. I'll gather water. Food. A pause, his eyes flicking toward the darkening ridgeline. Tonight, the canyon is ours alone. She wanted to argue. Wanted to assert some scrap of control over what happened to her next. But watching him move toward the stream, strong, silent, unbothered by the weight of the world the way she still very much was, she understood the futility of it. She went inside. Small. Dim, warm despite everything. A fire pit carved into the stone floor. A single folded blanket on a low wooden platform, that served, she supposed, as a bed. She sat, pulled her knees to her chest, let the exhaustion of the day finally catch up to her all at once. The lottery. The jeering crowd. The strange, quiet man who'd won her, and done nothing, but keep her breathing since. Outside, she watched him work, through the cabin's open doorway. Carrying water. arranging dried meat and berries with a precision that looked almost like reverence. She didn't understand him. She wasn't sure she wanted to. But there was a gravity to him. A pull she felt whether she wanted to admit it or not. When he came back inside, he knelt by the fire, set food near her without ceremony. Eat. I don't know if I can. Her throat was still too tight. You must. Almost like it wasn't a suggestion, so much as a law the canyon itself enforced. She took a small piece of dried meat. Bitter on her tongue. Sustaining anyway. He watched her eat, without pressing her to hurry, like he was quietly measuring how much trust she might one day be willing to spend on him. Night dropped fast in the canyon. Stars scattered thick overhead. Wind moving through rock, carrying a coyote's cry somewhere far off and lonely. He laid a blanket near the fire. Gestured for her to sit. She did. Still unsure where the line sat between fear and something closer to curiosity. For the first time, she watched him relax. Just slightly. Eyes softening as he stared into the flames. The scars along his forearms caught the light. Faint lines across his chest. Marks of a life lived alone, carried without complaint, because there'd been no one left to complain to. You don't have to talk, she offered. Testing the silence the way you test ice, before you trust your whole weight to it. He didn't answer right away. Then, almost to himself. I've carried too much noise in my own head to burden it with more words. A beat. You'll speak when you choose to. Relief, unexpected, moved through her chest. He didn't demand. Didn't coax. He just existed in the space beside her, steady, quiet, strange, and somehow that felt like more safety than any locked door ever could. I keep thinking I'll wake up, she said quietly, almost to herself. That the square, and the box, and you. That none of it will have happened. He was quiet a moment. And if you do wake up? Then I suppose I'll have to decide whether that's a relief, or a loss. She looked at him, firelight moving across his face. Because I'm not certain anymore, which one it would be. Something moved behind his eyes at that. He didn't answer it with words. Just let the fire crackle, let the silence hold the weight of what she'd admitted instead of forcing her to carry it alone. As shadows danced across the cabin walls, Adeline understood she'd be sleeping here tonight. Alone with the man who'd taken her by chance. Who hadn't once acted like a captor. And somewhere deep in her chest, quiet and unwelcome, and impossible to argue away, a small, weary flicker of hope refused to go out. Morning arrived sharp and cold. Sun barely stretching fingers across the canyon walls, before Adeline stirred, still wary of the man moving quietly around the cabin like a shadow, that had learned to make coffee. Every motion of his felt precise. Deliberate. Stacking wood. Tending the small pot over the fire. Sharpening the same blade, from the night before, like it was less a tool, and more a companion he owed some daily ritual to. The tension between them sat unspoken. Her pride, bruised and raw, from the humiliation of the square. His pride, quieter, radiating out through every careful, controlled movement. Neither spoke of it. But both of them felt the line drawn in the dirt between fear, and something that hadn't earned the name respect just yet. Eat. He held out dried meat, a slice of bread. No warmth in his voice. No condescension either, just the plain command of necessity. She bristled anyway. I don't need your charity. He raised an eyebrow. Unoffended. You need food. A beat. You don't know this canyon the way I do. Blunt. Not unkind. Not untrue, either. Hunger had been gnawing at her, since Ashford Flat, and they both knew it. She ate. Chewed slow, tasting dust and survival in every bite, while he watched, unhurried, patient the way stone is patient. After the meal, he gestured up toward the cliffs. "You'll climb. Carry water. Help tend the camp." A pause. No complaints. Her eyes went wide. "I'm not your servant. I'm not your captor," he said, calm as wind through rock. "You're here. You eat. You survive. I only ask that you learn." Pride flared hot in her chest. She wanted to fight him on it, wanted to prove, somehow, that she was more than a helpless bride handed off in a lottery, more than property passed hand to hand across a town square. So she climbed. The trail was brutal. Loose stone sliding under her boots, arms burning as she hauled a heavy pail of water up, from the hidden spring below. Tocho moved beside her, unbothered by the terrain, like the canyon had built him specifically for this. He didn't help. Not because he lacked the care to. Because he understood. Some lessons only stick, if you earn the bruises yourself. By midday her muscles screamed, breath coming ragged, hands raw from rope and stone. She wanted to collapse. To scream. To demand he let her go. His eyes held her steady instead. Dark. Unyielding. Not cruel. Just immovable, like the cliffs around them. "You see," he said finally. "The canyon teaches in ways no town ever could. You endure. A pause. Or you fail. Your choice." Her chest heaved. Anger, yes. But something else too. Something dangerously close to admiration. This man was relentless. And fair. Ruthless, but honest in every single word he gave her. He demanded respect, without once offering flattery in exchange for it, only the plain, unarguable recognition of whatever strength she managed to dig up out of herself. At dusk, he finally allowed rest. She slumped against a sun-warmed rock, sweat and dust caked to her skin, every ache a small, stubborn proof that she'd made it, through the day. He handed her a water skin. Their fingers brushed. She flinched, not from disgust, she realized a beat too late, but from something closer to surprise. He didn't pull away. "You're stronger than you believe," he said, quiet, almost to himself. "Don't mistake pride for weakness. They're not the same thing." She stared at him. Chest still heaving. Heart doing something complicated she didn't have a name for yet. For the first time, she felt a flicker of connection. A bridge built not out of words, but out of shared struggle, out of two people surviving the same brutal day side by side. She still didn't trust him fully. Might never. But she was starting to see him differently now. Not just the man who'd claimed her name off a slip of paper. A guide, maybe. Through pain. Through this strange new life. Through something that hadn't found its shape yet, but was already there, waiting, quiet as the canyon itself. The wind had been building all afternoon. Rattling loose stone against the canyon walls, carrying dust like a warning nobody wanted to read. Tocho worked the fire, checked the perimeter, with the tight, economical focus of a man who trusted his instincts more than any weather report. Adeline sat on the blanket's edge, knees pulled up, watching him with the growing familiarity of someone learning a language purely by immersion. No words, just rhythm. A low rumble rolled across the cliffs. She flinched. Tocho's eyes lifted skyward. "We'll need shelter." Before she could ask what that meant, he was already moving. Gathering wood. Dragging supplies inside. The wind screamed down the canyon corridor, whipping dust and gravel against the cabin's log walls. Rain came fast behind it, fat, heavy drops slamming the roof, punctuating the storm's roar like drumbeats counting down to something. She watched him work. Pulse climbing. There was something almost hypnotic in it. Precise, deliberate, every motion purposeful, like he was reading the storm the way other men read scripture. Lightning cracked. Lit the cabin white for half a second. long enough to catch his face fully. Dark planes, steady eyes finding hers across the small room. He didn't smile. Didn't speak. But the intensity in that single look sent something sharp down her spine. Are you afraid? His voice was low, almost intimate against the storm's noise. She hesitated. Of the storm. A breath. Or you? Something close to a smile ghosted across his mouth. Barely there. Both, he admitted, like that honesty cost him something rare, even for a man like him. You won't be harmed here. Not by the storm. A pause, weightier. Not by me. But I need you to trust that. Even if only a little. Her heart hammered. Trust was a foreign country to her right now. Especially with a man who'd won her in a cruel game, claimed her without so much as asking. And yet, there was no threat behind his words. Only honesty. Raw. Stark as the lightning splitting the sky outside. The storm intensified. Shadows shoved into the corners of the cabin. She reached for the blanket, fingers trembling. He noticed. Moved closer. Knelt beside her, commanding and protective all at once, a paradox that made her breath catch somewhere between fear and something far more dangerous. I've carried storms before, he said quietly, almost speaking to the wind itself rather than to her. But you. A beat. You're unlike any storm I've faced. And I won't let you break. Her breath caught hard in her throat. She searched his face for mockery. For cruelty. Found neither. Only raw honesty. Strength. And underneath it all, something achingly vulnerable he clearly wasn't used to letting anyone see. The wind slammed the door open. He moved on instinct, closing it, shielding her with the solid weight of his own body. She felt the heat radiating off him, and for the first time, since the square, fear tangled itself up with something else entirely. Safety. You're shaking, he observed. Quiet. He brushed a damp strand of hair from her face, careful, like she might shatter if he pressed too hard. Stop me if I go too deep. His voice dropped lower still. But I want you to know. You're not alone. Her eyes went wide. She didn't know whether to pull back or lean in. She did neither. She just let him stay. They sat together, through the rest of the storm. Two shadows in flickering firelight, listening to the canyon rage outside their walls. And in that shared silence, Adeline understood something she hadn't let herself consider, until right now. The man who'd claimed her in a cruel lottery might also be the only man who could protect her from every storm the world still had left to throw. For the first time, since her name had been pulled from that box, she didn't feel entirely alone. The storm passed by morning, leaving the canyon washed silver under a sky scrubbed clean. Wet pine and warm earth on the air. The valley hushed except for the crackle of dying embers in the cabin hearth. Adeline sat cross-legged on the blanket, watching Tocho feed the last of the fire. His hair loose, falling forward as he worked. Neither of them had spoken in hours. Each carrying thoughts too heavy to hand over just yet. The storm had cracked something open between them. Only slightly. A shared vulnerability neither one had planned for. He sat across from her eventually, legs folded, firelight catching in his eyes. You've been quiet, he said. I've been listening. Her voice came soft. To the canyon. The fire. A pause, her voice faltering on the last word. You. Something flickered across his face. Not quite a smile. I don't speak often. A beat. Words are heavy. Actions are easier to carry. She nodded slowly. Wanted, suddenly, to tell him everything. The loneliness since Nathaniel died, the shame of standing in that line up like cattle at auction, the bitterness that had calcified in her chest, over 2 long years of surviving mostly alone. Words felt too small for all of it. Too fragile to carry the weight. "I lost everything," she said instead, quiet. "Before I even understood what it meant to be safe." His eyes darkened. "And yet you're here. Alive. Breathing against every expectation." Expectation? Bitterness colored the word. "That the world would break you." His voice stayed low, steady. "But you're not so easily broken. I've seen it. In the way you move. The way you fight." A pause. "The way you endured yesterday, and didn't once ask me to make it easier." Heat rose to her cheeks. Not shame this time. Something else. Few people had ever looked at her, and seen strength first. Most only ever noticed how easily she could be hurt. She shifted closer to the fire. Closer to him, though the space between them still felt uncertain, still felt like something neither of them had agreed to close yet. "I thought I'd hate you," she admitted quietly. "I entered that lottery to mock their cruelty." His eyes held hers. "I never sought you as a prize." A long pause. "And yet, now that you're here, I find that I care. Not the way they do. Not as something owned." Another pause, heavier. "As someone I can't turn away from." Her throat tightened. She'd never heard anyone speak to her like that. Not even Nathaniel, in the early days, before the debt, and the fear had worn every soft edge off their marriage. "You're unlike anyone I've known," she whispered. "And yet I feel seen." He nodded slowly. "You are. A breath. And in this place. I don't wish to harm you. Only to protect you. If you'll allow it." Her pulse raced. She didn't fully trust him yet. That would take time. Trials. Proof she wasn't yet sure either of them could offer. But she felt it anyway. The fragile beginning of something neither of them had asked for, forged out of fire and storm and 2 people simply managing, somehow, to survive the same night side by side. Firelight caught the scars along his shoulders. Old battles. Old grief. She reached out, almost without meaning to, laid her hand near his. Not quite touching. He noticed. Didn't pull away. "You fought storms before," she said softly. "And yet you're letting me see them now. Because you're not a storm to fight." His voice dropped to something close to a whisper. "You're someone I need to understand." A pause. "And maybe, if fate allows it, someone I can protect." "I keep checking, if you're real," she admitted, a small, embarrassed laugh escaping her. "Like some part of me is waiting for you to turn back, into the man I was afraid of at the platform." He looked at her a long moment. "And when I don't? Then I suppose I'll have to find something else to be afraid of." Something almost like a real smile moved across his mouth then, gone as quick as it came, but she'd seen it. She said nothing more. Just let the fire crackle between them, let the canyon breathe around the both of them in the dark. They rose before the sun the next morning, packed what little they'd need, and started deeper, into the canyon toward the heart of his land. A place, he told her, where his people still held ground the drought hadn't, yet managed to steal from them. She rode behind him again. Wrists free this time. No rawhide. Just trust, however thin, stretched taut between 2 people, who hadn't earned the right to call it that yet. The trail narrowed, as they climbed a ridge overlooking a hidden basin, and it was there, reaching for her canteen, fingers brushing the strap across her chest, that something slipped loose, from beneath her collar, and swung free in the morning light. A small brass ring. Threaded on a leather cord. Worn smooth from years against skin. Tocho's horse stopped. He didn't say anything at first. Just stared at the ring like it had reached across 15 years, and struck him somewhere he thought had gone numb a long time ago. "Where?" he said finally, voice gone rough in a way she hadn't heard from him yet. "Where did you get that?" Adeline's hand went instinctively to the ring, closing around it like she could shield it from whatever had just changed in his face. "It was my husband's." Her voice was careful. Uncertain. "Nathaniel's. He wore it in the war. Gave it to me before." She stopped. Watched something move behind Tocho's eyes, that looked less like recognition, and more like the ground shifting under a man who'd spent 15 years believing he understood exactly what his own life meant. "Nathaniel," he repeated. Quiet. Almost like testing whether saying the name out loud would make the rest of it true. "You knew him?" Adeline searched his face, confusion and something sharper twisting together in her chest. Tocho didn't answer right away. He looked out, over the ridge instead, out toward the red distance, where the canyon opened up, into land his people had bled for, and were still, slowly, losing, and when he finally spoke, his voice had gone somewhere far off. Somewhere 15 years and one battlefield away. "I know that ring," he said. "Because I watched the man wearing it choose not to kill me. When every other soldier in his company already had their rifles raised." The wind moved through the canyon below them. Neither of them said anything else for a long moment. Because some truths, once spoken, don't leave room for anything to follow them. Not yet. The wind didn't move for a long time, after he said it. Adeline sat frozen on her horse. Ring still caught between two fingers. Because some sentences don't finish landing right away. They circle first. Test the ground. And only then do they drop the full weight of themselves on you, all at once, like a roof giving way, after years of quiet rot nobody bothered checking. Tocho watched me not kill him. She heard it again in her own head, twisted it, tried to make it mean something smaller. Something easier. It didn't get easier. "You knew Nathaniel." Her voice came out thin. Barely hers. "You knew him before. Before he was your husband." Tocho's jaw was tight. Stone again. The soft thing, that had cracked open in him last night, gone, sealed back under 15 years of practice. "Yes." "How?" He didn't answer right away. Turned his horse instead, started moving deeper along the ridge, like the story needed distance to be told properly. Like standing still, while he said it might break something in him she wasn't ready to watch break. She followed. Because what else was there to do? Sit on a ridge alone, with a question, that size, and no one to hand it to. I was 16. His voice, when it came, had gone somewhere far off. Flat in the way voices go flat, when a man spent years making sure it never cracks in front of anyone. There was a raid. Soldiers came through at dawn. My village didn't have time to run. Adeline's stomach dropped. "Tocho." I hid under a wagon. He kept his eyes forward. Wouldn't look at her. Maybe couldn't. Watched my mother. My sister. A pause that stretched too long, too taut, like a rope about to give. I don't need to finish that part. She didn't ask him to. A soldier found me. His hand tightened on the reins. Young. My age, maybe a year or two older. Rifle already up. Already aimed. Another pause. Shorter this time, like he was forcing himself, through it before he lost the nerve. And then he didn't fire. "Nathaniel." He looked at me a long time. Tocho's voice dropped lower. Long enough that another soldier shouted at him to finish it. And he didn't. A breath. He lowered the rifle. Told the others I'd already run off, into the rocks. Lied for me. To his own men. In the middle of a battle, that was supposed to end, with every one of us dead. Adeline's throat closed up. Why, she managed. Why would he? I don't know. Tocho finally turned to look at her. Something raw sitting behind his eyes now, something he clearly hadn't planned on letting loose today. I never got the chance to ask him. I ran. Didn't stop running for 2 days. Never saw his face again. A long pause. Until I saw that ring around your neck yesterday morning. The canyon stretched out below them, red and endless, and utterly indifferent to the size of what had just been said out loud. Adeline pressed her palm flat against her chest, over the ring, over the place, where her heart was doing something complicated, and painful all at once. Nathaniel never told her. Not once. Not in 8 years of marriage. Not in the long quiet evenings, before the debt, before the fear, before everything between them turned to survival math instead of conversation. He carried that. Alone. The whole time. And she never knew. He never spoke of it, she whispered. Not once. Some things a man doesn't have words for. Tocho's voice had gone quiet again. Careful. I understand that better than most. They sat there a moment longer. 2 people on a ridge, tangled together now by a dead man neither of them had fully understood, while he was alive. So that's it, Adeline said finally. Trying the thought out loud, testing its shape. That's why you didn't refuse. When they called my name. Partly. Tocho's eyes met hers, steadier now. The rest, I told you already. I wasn't going to let this town hand you off to a stranger, and call it justice. And now? He didn't answer right away. Which told her more than any answer would have. 3 days folded into each other after that. Quiet ones, mostly. The kind of quiet that isn't empty, so much as it's full of things neither person has found the courage to say yet. She learned the canyon the way you learn a language by living inside it. Which berries wouldn't make her sick? Which rocks held morning shade longest? How to read the wind off the ridgeline, before it hit the valley floor, because Tocho had shown her once, wordlessly, pointing at a bend of dust rising off a far peak an hour, before the wind actually reached them. You're teaching me to survive, she said one morning, arms tired from the day's chores in a way that no longer embarrassed her the way it had, that first climb. I'm teaching you to belong. He didn't look up from the fire. There's a difference. She thought about that all day. Turned it over the way she used to turn over difficult passages of scripture back, when she still taught children how to read them. Belonging. Not survival. Something with roots instead of just breath. It scared her more than the canyon ever had. On the 4th day, Tocho took her somewhere he hadn't yet. They rode further than usual, past the ridge, that marked what she'd started to think of as the edge of his territory, deeper into land that felt older somehow. Worn smooth by more feet than just his own. The trail widened. Opened into a shallow basin ringed by red cliff walls. And there, tucked into the shadow of the rock, small and sparse, and quiet in a way that made her chest ache, before she even understood why, sat a cluster of dwellings. People. Not many. Fewer than she expected. Children with hollow cheeks watching from doorways. An old woman grinding something in a stone bowl, with hands that shook more than they should have for the effort involved. A man near Tocho's age, thin in a way that had nothing to do with build and everything to do with hunger, standing guard near the basin's only visible water source. A spring, barely a trickle, cupped in a stone basin, that had clearly once run far fuller than it did now. This is my people. Tocho's voice had gone quieter than she'd ever heard it. What's left of them? Adeline stared at the spring. At the children. At the thin, careful way everyone moved, like motion itself cost something they couldn't afford to spend freely. They're starving, she said. It wasn't a question. Dying slower than starving. Tocho dismounted. Didn't look at her. The drought hit us, before it hit the town. We just had less to lose in the first place. So nobody noticed. Because that's how it always goes, isn't it? She thought it before she could stop herself. The ones with the least go first. And the ones with the most call it bad luck instead of what it actually is. A small girl, no older than 7, edged out from behind the old woman's skirts, and stared up at Adeline, with wide, careful eyes. Not fear exactly. Something closer to caution learned too young. Adeline knelt slow, unthreatening, and held out one hand, empty, palm up. The girl didn't take it. But she didn't run either. "You're good with children," Tocho said quietly, watching. "I used to be a teacher." Adeline stood, brushing dust from her skirts. "Before all this, I've spent more years around children than grown men, if I'm honest. Present company accepted." Something ghosted across his mouth. Almost a smile. "This spring." She nodded toward the basin. "Is it fed by the same underground water that runs beneath your land?" Tocho finally turned to face her. "The same source Ashford Flat has been fighting over without ever understanding what it actually connects to." The ground seemed to tilt slightly under her. Her land. Nathaniel's land. The land Pruitt had been, so strangely, desperately eager to see fall into new hands the moment her name got called in that square. Wait. Her mind was racing now, stitching pieces together faster than she could speak them. "Wait, you're telling me my land sits on the same water source that's keeping your people alive?" "Yes. And you knew that?" Her voice sharpened, suspicion rising fast, and hot in her chest. "Before you ever bought that ticket. You knew exactly whose name might come out of that box." Tocho's expression didn't change. Which somehow made it worse. "I knew your husband owned land, with water on it," he said carefully. "I didn't know it was you standing in that lineup until the moment I saw your face." "That's convenient." "It's the truth." "Is it?" She stepped back from him, arms crossing tight over her chest, the old fear rising back up, through the cracks, that 4 days of quiet trust had only barely started to fill. "Because from where I'm standing, that sounds an awful lot like a man who needed access to water. And found a very tidy way to get it." Something crossed his face. Hurt, maybe. Or something close enough to it, that she almost regretted the words the second they left her mouth. "Almost. I paid a coin to shame a town that sells its own women." His voice had gone low. Controlled in a way that felt more dangerous than shouting would have. "I didn't know what that coin would cost me, until it was already spent." "How do I know that?" "You don't." He held her gaze, unflinching. "That's what trust is, Adeline. Believing something before you have proof of it." The old woman at the grinding stone looked up then. Watched them both, with eyes that had clearly seen more hard years than either of them combined. Said something low in a language Adeline didn't understand, and Tocho answered back, brief, before turning away toward the horses. "What did she say?" Adeline asked. He didn't look back at her. "She said the canyon doesn't care whose fault the drought is. Only who's brave enough to fix it." They rode back to the cabin in silence. But it was a different silence than before. Heavier. Full of a question neither of them had finished asking yet. That night, the fire burned low between them, and neither one reached to feed it. Adeline sat with her knees pulled up, watching the embers instead of him. Because looking at him felt dangerous right now. Felt like it might tip something over that she wasn't ready to have tipped. "You're still angry," Tocho said finally. "I'm still confused." She corrected him, though the two weren't as far apart as she wanted them to be. "There's a difference." "Is there?" "Don't do that." Her eyes flicked to him, sharp. Don't turn my own words back on me like a mirror. I'm not in the mood for lessons tonight. Something almost like a smile ghosted across his mouth. Gone fast. Fair. Silence again. The fire popped, sent a small shower of sparks up, into the dark. Tell me something true, she said finally. Quiet. Something you haven't told me yet. He was quiet a long moment. Long enough she thought maybe he wouldn't answer at all. Then. The night before the lottery. I almost didn't go. She turned to look at him fully. Why didn't you? Because part of me knew. His voice had dropped low again, that same careful, deliberate register he used, when the words underneath cost him something. Knew that walking, into that square, with a coin in my hand was going to change something I couldn't take back. And I've spent years building a life specifically designed to never let anything change again. What made you go anyway? My uncle. A faint, humorless huff of breath, almost a laugh. Elder in what's left of our people. He told me a man, who spends his whole life guarding against loss eventually forgets what he was trying to protect in the first place. A pause. I didn't understand him. Until I saw you standing in that lineup. Adeline's chest tightened. And now? Do you understand him now? Tocho looked at her. Really looked, the kind of look that didn't leave room to hide behind a joke, or a deflection. Now I understand him better than I want to. Neither of them said anything else for a long while. The fire burned lower. Neither one moved to feed it. Because feeding it would have meant admitting neither of them wanted this night to end yet. The next few days folded into work. Real work, the kind that leaves a person too tired at night to keep circling the same unanswered questions. Adeline learned to skin small game, without flinching, mostly. Learned the particular silence Tocho fell into when he was listening to something on the wind, that she couldn't hear yet, and learned, slowly, not to interrupt it. Learned, too, how to grind dried corn the way the old woman at the basin camp had shown her on a second visit, hands moving clumsy at first, and then less so, the small girl watching, from the doorway a little closer each time, a little less afraid. She also learned something else. Something that kept snagging in her mind like a hem catching on a nail. Whenever he thought she wasn't watching, Tocho would stop. Stare out toward the eastern ridge, the direction, she'd come to understand, of Ashford Flat, and something would move across his face. Not fear exactly. Calculation. You're worried about something, she said on the sixth evening. Direct. She'd stopped pretending patience got her further with him than honesty did. And it's not the drought. He didn't deny it. Which was answer enough on its own. Pruitt sent men through the canyon 2 days before the lottery. His voice was flat. Careful. Surveying. My uncle saw them. They didn't come near our camp. But they were mapping something. Mapping what? Water routes. He finally looked at her. I think the mayor of your town already knew exactly where the last spring in this whole basin sat. Long before he ever built that box and called it charity. Adeline felt something cold settle low in her stomach. You think Pruitt planned this? All of it. The lottery. My name. I think a desperate man with power doesn't leave outcomes to chance, if he can help it. Tocho's jaw was tight. I think your husband's land, the water underneath it, and the fact that you were widowed, and alone with no one left to protect that land, I think all of that made you a very convenient name to pull out of a box. The fire cracked. Somewhere out past the ridge, a coyote called, thin and lonely against the dark. Nathaniel didn't die of fever. The words came out of Adeline, before she'd fully decided to say them. Because once the thought existed, fully formed, in the front of her mind, she couldn't put it back. Could he? Tocho went very still. What are you asking me? I'm asking. Her voice cracked slightly. She pushed through it. I'm asking if you think Pruitt had something to do with my husband's death. The silence that followed lasted long enough that she felt her own heartbeat in it. I don't know, Tocho said finally. Careful. Honest, in the way she'd started to understand honesty cost him. But I think it's a question worth answering. They rode to the eastern ridge the next morning. Not into Ashford Flat itself, too dangerous, both of them agreed on, that without needing to say it aloud, but close enough to see smoke rising off the town's chimneys, close enough that Adeline felt her pulse spike just looking at the familiar shapes of rooftops she used to call home. There. Tocho pointed. A small, weathered cabin sat apart from the main cluster of buildings, near the old churchyard. The doctor who signed your husband's death record. Does he still live there? Adeline nodded slowly. Dr. Alden Whitcomb. He's lived in that same house since before I was born. Would he talk to you? He might. Her mind raced, sifting through old memories. Whitcomb's careful hands, his quiet, apologetic manner the day he'd told her Nathaniel's fever had taken a turn no medicine could fix. He always liked Nathaniel. Might still feel he owes him something. They waited until dusk. Tocho stayed near the tree line, out of sight, while Adeline slipped alone, through the back paths of a town that had, less than 2 weeks ago, watched her get handed off like property, and called it mercy. Her hands shook the whole walk to Whitcomb's door. He answered on the second knock. Older than she remembered, or maybe just more tired, the kind of tired that comes from watching a town slowly rot, and knowing you don't have the power to stop it. His eyes widened at the sight of her. Adeline. God in heaven, child, you shouldn't be here. I need to ask you something. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. About Nathaniel. Whitcomb's face changed. Something guarded slid down over it like a shutter closing against a storm. Adeline. Please. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. You told me it was fever. I need to know if that's true. The old doctor's throat worked. His eyes flicked past her, out toward the dark street, like he was checking who might be listening even though the road stood empty. Come inside, he said finally. Quickly. The kitchen was small. Dim, lit by a single lamp Whitcomb kept turned low even once the door was shut and bolted behind them. He didn't sit. Paced instead, hands twisting together in a way that told Adeline everything, before he'd said a single word. Doctor. Her voice was quiet but firm. Please. He stopped pacing. Looked at her, with something that might have been guilt, might have been grief, might have been both tangled together, so tight they'd become the same thing. Your husband didn't die of fever. The words came out fast, like he'd been holding them, so long they'd built up pressure behind his teeth. I wrote that on the record, because Cyrus Pruitt stood in this very kitchen, and told me exactly what to write. Adeline's knees went weak. She gripped the edge of the table. Tell me. Nathaniel came to see me 2 days before he died. Whitcomb's voice shook now. Not sick. Not fevered. Scared. Told me Pruitt had approached him about signing over water rights to that spring on your land. Said the town needed it. Said it was for the greater good. Nathaniel refused. And then? And then 3 nights later, he was dead. Whitcomb wouldn't meet her eyes now. Found in his own barn. Pruitt came to me himself. Told me the town couldn't survive the panic if word got out that a man had been murdered over water rights. Told me it would be kinder, safer, to write it up as fever. Kinder for who? Adeline's voice had gone dangerously quiet. For the town. Whitcomb's shoulders sagged. That's what he said. I've told myself that lie every day for 2 years, Adeline. I am so sorry. The room tilted. She gripped the table harder, breath coming shallow and fast. 2 years. 2 years she'd grieved a man for dying of fever. 2 years she'd told herself there was nothing to be done, nothing to fight, just grief to carry, and debts to pay, and a slow, quiet unraveling of everything Nathaniel had built. And the whole time it had been Pruitt. Why, she whispered. Why would he go this far? Over water. Because the town's dying, Adeline. Whitcomb's voice cracked. And a dying town makes men do things they'd never have imagined themselves capable of. Pruitt needed that water. Needed it controlled, quiet, in hands he could manage. A pause. A widow with no family left to fight for her. That made you the easiest hand to control. Adeline's whole body went cold. The lottery. It hadn't been chance at all. He rigged it, she said slowly, the pieces clicking, into place with a horrible, mechanical precision. The lottery. He made sure my name would come out of that box no matter who else's went in. I don't know how he managed the draw itself. Whitcomb shook his head. But I'd believe it of him. I'd believe almost anything of him now. Outside, a dog barked somewhere down the street. Adeline flinched hard at the sound, nerves stretched thin as wire. You have to leave, Whitcomb said suddenly, urgency sharpening his voice. If Pruitt finds out you know this, Adeline, he's already killed once to keep this quiet. I don't think he'd hesitate twice. She nodded. Throat too tight for words. Turned toward the door. Adeline. Whitcomb's voice stopped her, hand on the latch. For what it's worth. I am sorry. I should have told you the truth 2 years ago. You should have. Her voice came out flat. Raw. But you're telling me now. That has to count for something. She slipped back out, into the dark street, heart hammering, the truth sitting in her chest like a stone she didn't know how to carry yet. Tocho was waiting exactly where she'd left him, tense and still against the tree line, and the second she came into view he was moving toward her, closing the distance fast. What happened? His hands found her shoulders, steadying her before she'd even realized how badly she was shaking. Adeline. What did he tell you? Pruitt killed him. Her voice broke on the words, 2 years of grief, and confusion finally finding a shape sharp enough to cut through the numbness. Nathaniel. He killed him, because he wouldn't sign over the water rights. And then he rigged the lottery to get to me. To get to the land. Tocho's whole body went rigid. Something dark and dangerous moved behind his eyes. Say that again, he said quietly. Too quietly. Pruitt murdered my husband. She met his gaze, fury finally burning hot enough to steady her voice. And he used a town's desperation to dress it up as tradition. As charity. Her hands curled into fists at her sides. He turned grief into a spectacle, and called it mercy. Tocho was quiet a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice had dropped into something low and lethal. Then we're not just fighting for water anymore. No. Adeline held his gaze, steady now, something new hardening in her chest, where fear used to sit alone. We're fighting for justice. They rode back, into the canyon under a moon just past full, neither speaking much, the weight of the night sitting heavy between them. Adeline kept turning it over. Nathaniel's face, the version of him she'd built in her memory, over 2 years of quiet, unanswered grief, now cracking apart, and reforming around a truth she'd never let herself imagine. He'd died protecting something. Not fading away from illness, helpless and small. He'd stood his ground. And it had cost him everything. Somehow that made the grief sharper. And somehow, it also made it easier to carry. Because now she knew what to do with it. You're quiet, Tocho said as they reached the ridge overlooking the valley. I'm angry. Her voice came out steadier than she expected. I've spent 2 years angry at fate. At fever. At a world that just takes things from people for no reason. A breath. Turns out there was a reason. There was a man. And men can be stopped. Tocho glanced at her, something like respect moving across his face. That's a dangerous thing to say out loud, Adeline Hargrove. Good. She met his eyes, unflinching. I'm done being careful with dangerous things. They didn't sleep much that night. Sat instead by the low fire, piecing together everything they knew. The surveyors on Canyon Land, before the lottery, the convenient timing of Nathaniel's death, the way Pruitt's watch chain caught the light a little too proudly for a mayor presiding over a town on its knees. If he rigged the draw, Tocho said, staring into the flames, he'll have done it through someone. A man like that doesn't dirty his own hands with the mechanics. Someone on the lottery committee. Adeline nodded slowly, memory sharpening. There were only 3 men who handled that box before the drawing. Pruitt. The town clerk. And. She stopped. And? Whitcomb. Her stomach turned. The doctor. He was there. He signed off on the ticket count. Tocho's jaw tightened. Then he knows more than he told you tonight. Or he's as trapped by Pruitt as everyone else in that town. Adeline shook her head slowly. I don't know which. I don't know who to trust in that whole square anymore. You trust me, Tocho said. Quiet. Not quite a question. She looked at him a long moment. Firelight moving across the sharp planes of his face, the scars, the eyes that had gone soft in a way she was still learning to read. Yes, she said finally. God help me. I do. Something eased in his shoulders, tension she hadn't fully realized he was carrying, until it loosened. Then we start there, he said. With what we know. And we find a way to make it matter. Word came 4 days later. Not through any door or letter, the canyon didn't work that way. It came through Tocho's uncle, the elder from the basin camp, riding in at dusk on a horse pushed hard enough to lather, face drawn tight, with news he clearly hated carrying. Adeline watched Tocho's posture change the second the old man started speaking their language, low and urgent. Watched the color drain slightly from his face. What is it? She asked, the second there was a pause long enough to fit the question into. Tocho didn't answer right away. Turned to her instead, something grim settling behind his eyes. Pruitt's been to the basin camp. His voice was tight. Controlled in the way, that meant he was working hard to keep it that way. Told my uncle the town intends to claim the water source. All of it. Says it falls under some old territorial charter nobody's enforced in 30 years. He can't do that. Adeline's voice sharpened. That land isn't his to claim. He's already sent word to Ashford Flat. Tocho's jaw was a hard line now. Rallying men. Telling them the water crisis ends the moment they take back what's rightfully theirs. Telling them. He stopped. Swallowed hard. Telling them what? That the Apache stole his bride. Tocho's voice had gone flat, dangerous. That taking back the water, and taking back you are the same fight now. The fire popped between them, sudden and sharp in the quiet. He's using me. Adeline's hands curled into fists. Using what happened in that square to turn a whole town into an army. Yes. How long do we have? Tocho exchanged a brief, low word with his uncle. The old man's answer was short. Grim. 3 days, Tocho said. Maybe less. Adeline stared out, into the dark canyon beyond the firelight, the same red walls, that had felt like a prison less than 2 weeks ago now feeling like the only ground worth defending she had left in the world. "Then we have 3 days," she said, "to decide how we're going to fight back." Tocho looked at her. Something fierce and steady passing between them, wordless, the kind of understanding that doesn't need speech to carry its full weight. "Not we," he said quietly. "Us. Together. Or we don't survive what's coming at all." Above them, the stars kept their slow, indifferent turn across the sky. Somewhere out past the ridge, a town was gathering itself into a weapon. And somewhere in the quiet dark of a canyon, that had never asked to become a battlefield, 2 people who'd started, as strangers bound by a folded scrap of paper sat side by side, and understood, without needing to say it aloud, that whatever came next, they would not face it alone. 3 days. That's what they had. 3 days to turn a hidden valley into something that could survive a town's worth of rage marching in, with rifles and torches, and a mayor's lies stitched into every man's reason for coming. Adeline didn't sleep that first night. Couldn't. Lay on the blanket beside the dying fire, and ran the numbers, over and over in her head like a ledger that refused to balance. How many men Pruitt could rally? How many guns Ashford Flat actually owned versus how many it just talked about owning? How much of what was coming was really about water, and how much was just men, who needed somewhere to point their fear, so it didn't have to look at itself? Because that's what fear does, when a town runs it too long, she thought. It goes looking for a target. Doesn't much care if the target's fair. Just needs to be big enough to swallow the noise. She sat up. Fire down to embers. Tocho awake across from her, not pretending otherwise. "You should sleep," he said. "So should you." She nodded at him, pointed. "Not doing it either." A faint huff. Almost a laugh. "Almost." "Fair," he said. They rode to the basin camp at first light. Tocho's uncle, Neshoba, she'd learned his name was, though he still mostly addressed her, with careful, formal distance, met them at the edge of the dwellings, with the kind of face that had already done the arithmetic, and didn't love the sum. "We cannot fight a whole town," he said, once introductions and greetings had folded themselves down into the real conversation. "Not with what little we have left. Not with children in these homes." "I'm not asking anyone to fight," Adeline said. Neshoba's eyes moved to her. "Measuring. Then what are you asking?" "For time." She held his gaze steady. "And for the truth to be heard by people who haven't heard it yet." "The truth." Neshoba's mouth twisted, not quite a smile. "Truth has never once stopped a mob, girl." "No." Adeline didn't flinch. "But it's stopped a man before. One at a time, it adds up." Tocho watched this exchange, with something unreadable moving behind his eyes. When Neshoba finally turned away to gather the camp's few remaining able-bodied men, Tocho leaned close. "You have a plan," he said. "Not a question." "I have the beginning of one." She exhaled, slow. "I need to go back into town." "No." The word came out fast. Hard. "Absolutely not. Tocho. He already killed one person, who threatened his hold on that water." His jaw was tight, voice low and urgent. "You walk back, into Ashford Flat now, with what you know, and you become the next name in his ledger. I become the only person in that town who can say what happened out loud." Adeline stepped closer, refusing to back down, from the fear in his eyes even, as some small, warm part of her chest ached at the sight of it. Pruitt built his whole plan on nobody having proof. On a widow, with no family, no voice, easy to erase. A breath. "I'm done being easy to erase." Tocho stared at her. Something warring behind his expression. Fear, yes. But underneath it, something that looked almost like pride fighting its way up, through the fear to breathe. "If you do this," he said finally, quiet, "you don't do it alone." I wasn't planning to. The plan came together fast, pieced from what little they had, because there wasn't time for it to come together any other way. Whitcomb's confession, spoken, not written, which meant it could be denied the second Pruitt applied enough pressure. The surveyor's Neshoba had seen mapping water routes, before the lottery, which proved intent, but not murder. And the ledger. Because there had to be a ledger. Men like Pruitt didn't keep secrets in their heads. They kept them in numbers, tucked somewhere they thought was safe, because numbers felt like control, and control was the only religion a man like that ever really practiced. Nathaniel kept records, Adeline said, pacing now, the old teacher's habit of thinking out loud taking over. Every transaction on our land. Every offer Pruitt made him. If he refused to sign anything, there'd be paper. Somewhere. Where would he have kept it? Not the house. She shook her head. Too easy to search. He'd have hidden it somewhere he trusted more than his own walls. She stopped pacing. Went very still. "The schoolhouse," she said slowly. "There's a loose floorboard under the third row, near the window. I used to keep exam papers there, so the children couldn't cheat off each other." A small, humorless laugh escaped her, ragged around the edges. "Nathaniel knew about it. He was the one who showed it to me. Said it was the one place in town nobody would think to look for anything important." Tocho's eyes sharpened. "Because a mayor doesn't think to search a schoolroom floor for the thing that could end him." "Exactly. Then that's where we start. Tonight. We don't have 3 days to be careful. We might only have 2. They slipped into Ashford Flat, that same night, Tocho staying close to the tree line, while Adeline moved alone, through streets she'd once known better than her own reflection, now foreign feeling and dangerous in a way that made every shadow seem to lean toward her. The schoolhouse door was unlocked. It always had been. Nobody in this town had ever thought a schoolroom worth guarding. Adeline slipped inside, breath held tight, and crossed to the third row by memory more than sight, fingers finding the loose board, without needing to look. It gave way with a soft groan. Underneath, a small tin box, dust-thick, exactly where Nathaniel had shown her all those years ago. Her hands shook as she pried it open. Papers. Dozens of them. Land surveys. Water rights documentation. And beneath it all, a single folded letter in Nathaniel's own careful handwriting, dated 3 days before he died. She didn't read it there. Couldn't. Just closed the box, tucked it against her chest, and moved back out, into the dark, heart hammering so hard she was certain the whole town could hear it. Tocho was waiting exactly where he'd promised to be. Didn't ask questions, just pulled her close for one brief, fierce moment, relief and fear tangled together in the grip of his arms, before they were moving again, back toward the canyon, back toward whatever came next. She read the letter by firelight once they were safe. Tocho sat close, not touching her, giving her the space the moment clearly demanded. Her hands trembled as she unfolded it. "Adeline. If you're reading this, something has happened to me, and I need you to know it wasn't chance. Pruitt has asked 3 times now for the water rights on our land, and 3 times I've refused. He grows more desperate each time he asks. I fear what a desperate man does, when he's used to getting what he wants. I've kept records of every conversation. Every threat dressed up as a favor. If anything happens to me, take this to someone outside this town, who cannot be bought. Do not trust the sheriff, Pruitt pays him more than the town does. Trust only what you can prove, and trust it loudly, in front of witnesses, who cannot later claim they didn't hear. I love you more than these pages can hold. Whatever comes, know that I refuse to hand over what was ours. Not for pride. For you. For the life we were still trying to build. Yours, always. Nathaniel. Adeline's tears came fast and silent, the letter shaking in her grip. 2 years of grief she'd carried like a wound, with no wound to point to, and now, finally, proof. Proof that he hadn't simply faded. Proof that he'd stood, and fought, and loved her enough to leave a trail even his own death couldn't erase. Tocho didn't say anything. Just reached over, slow, and let his hand rest against her back, steady, warm, present. He knew, she whispered finally. He knew what was coming. And he still refused. Because some things are worth more than staying alive to enjoy them. Tocho's voice was rough. I understand that better than I wish I did. Adeline wiped her eyes. Folded the letter carefully back into the tin. And when she looked up at Tocho, something new had settled into her face. Grief, still, but tempered now with something harder. Something that looked a great deal like resolve. Tomorrow, she said, we bring this to the town. Tomorrow they're marching on us with rifles, Adeline. Then we make sure the truth gets there first. Dawn broke gray and heavy, clouds building thick along the western ridge in a way that made Neshoba squint skyward, and mutter something about the canyon finally remembering how to storm. They didn't have long. Word had come at first light. Pruitt's men were already moving, a column of riders cutting across the flats toward the canyon mouth, rifles catching the pale morning light. They'll reach the basin camp by midday, Neshoba said, grim. We don't have time for schoolroom letters and clever plans, Tocho. We have time to run, or time to fight. There's a third option. Adeline stepped forward, tin box held tight against her chest. We meet them. Before they reach the camp. Before this becomes something none of us can walk back from. Meet them. Neshoba's eyebrows rose. Alone. Not alone. Tocho's hand found the small of Adeline's back, steady. Together. In front of every man riding, with Pruitt today. Let them hear the truth, before they fire a single shot they can't take back. Neshoba studied them both a long moment. Something in his weathered face shifted. Not agreement exactly, but the exhausted respect of a man who'd run out of better ideas. Then we ride, he said. All of us. Together. The canyon mouth opened, onto a wide, flat stretch of scrubland, the natural boundary between Ashford Flat and the red country beyond it, the place where two worlds had circled each other warily for longer than anyone still living could remember. Pruitt's column crested the rise just past noon. Adeline counted, heart in her throat, as the line kept coming. 20 men. 30. More than she'd let herself imagine, rifles glinting, faces set hard, with the particular righteousness of men who'd been told their cause was just, and hadn't thought to question it. At the front, on a gray horse too fine for a man of his supposed modest means, rode Cyrus Pruitt. Tocho's men, barely a dozen, most of them thin, from hunger, none of them eager for this, formed a loose line beside Neshoba near the canyon mouth. Adeline stood at the front beside Tocho, tin box in her arms, heart hammering so hard she thought it might crack a rib. Because this is either the bravest thing I've ever done, she thought, or the last mistake I ever make. And there's no way to know, which until it's already happening. Pruitt reined his horse to a stop 30 yards out. Smiled that same oiled smile she remembered, from the platform, like none of the last 2 weeks had touched him at all. Mrs. Hargrove. His voice carried easy across the flat ground, pitched for the crowd behind him, as much as for her. How good of you to spare us the trouble of coming further. Come on home now, and we'll forget this whole unfortunate business ever happened. Unfortunate business. Adeline's voice came out steadier than she felt. Is that what you're calling it? Selling women in a town square. Murdering my husband over water rights. Rigging a lottery to steal his land. A murmur rippled through the column behind Pruitt. His smile didn't move, but something behind his eyes went sharp and cold. That's a dangerous accusation to make, Mrs. Hargrove. His voice had lowered, lost some of its performance. Grief does strange things to a woman's mind. Perhaps the Apache have filled your head with. Dr. Whitcomb told me the truth. She cut him off, voice ringing clear across the flat. 3 nights before Nathaniel died, he came to Whitcomb scared, telling him you'd threatened him over water rights he refused to sign away. 3 days later, my husband was dead in his own barn. And you stood in Whitcomb's kitchen, and told him to write it up as fever. Silence spread through the column like a held breath. Lies. Pruitt's voice cracked, just slightly, on the word. Slander from a grieving widow, and a savage, who wants her land for himself. I have the proof. Adeline lifted the tin box high enough for the whole column to see it. Nathaniel's own letter. Written 3 days before he died. Naming you. Every threat. Every refusal. That letter proves nothing. Pruitt's horse shifted beneath him, sensing his rider's tension. A dead man's paranoid scribbling. Then why, Adeline's voice rose, cutting through his like a blade, through canvas, did you rig the lottery to make sure my name came out of that box? Why did surveyors walk this canyon mapping water routes 2 days, before you ever built that platform in the square? Why, her voice broke, just slightly, before she forced it steady again, why did you stand in front of this whole town, and call it charity, when the whole time it was theft? It was murder. Dressed up in a wooden box painted white, so it would look decent. The column had gone utterly still now. Men who'd ridden out, that morning believing they were reclaiming stolen water, reclaiming a woman taken by force, now sat their horses, with expressions shifting, from righteous certainty, into something far more uncertain. She's lying. Pruitt's voice had lost its polish entirely now, gone thin and desperate. All of you know me. I've served this town for. You've bled this town. A new voice cut in. Dr. Whitcomb himself, riding up from somewhere behind the column, face pale but resolute, having clearly followed word of the confrontation the moment he'd heard it was happening. I wrote the false record myself, Cyrus. God forgive me, I did it, because you frightened me into it. But I won't carry that lie one more day. Gasps rippled through the gathered men. Pruitt's face had gone the color of old ash. Alden. His voice cracked entirely now, all pretense gone. You'd take her word, and this old fool's, over mine. I'd take the truth, Whitcomb said, over whatever comfortable lie has let me sleep at night the last 2 years. And I should have said this sooner. To all of you. He turned in his saddle, addressing the column directly now. Nathaniel Hargrove was murdered for refusing to sign over his water rights. Cyrus Pruitt ordered me to falsify the record. I did it. I'm not proud of it. But it's the truth, and you all deserve to hear it, before you ride one more mile on his word. The silence that followed felt different now. Heavier. The kind of silence that comes right before something finally breaks open, after being held too tight for too long. He used your fear, Adeline said, softer now, addressing the column directly, men she'd known her whole life, faces she'd taught in her schoolroom, or buried husbands beside in the churchyard. The drought is real. The suffering is real. But he turned your suffering into a weapon he could point wherever he needed it pointed. First at women he could sell off like cattle, then at people he'd already tried to erase once before. Her eyes swept the crowd. How many of you lost someone to fever these last 2 years? How many of those fevers might not have been fever at all? A woman near the back of the column, Adeline recognized her, barely, one of the other widows who'd stood in that lineup beside her 2 weeks ago, made a small, broken sound. My Thomas, she said, voice shaking. He argued with Pruitt over the mill rights, not 2 months before he took sick and died. Another voice, further back. My brother too. Land dispute. Fever inside a week. The murmurs were building now, rippling backward through the column like a fuse catching, each new voice adding weight to a suspicion that had clearly been sitting quiet and unspoken in this town for far longer than anyone had dared say out loud. Pruitt's horse shifted beneath him, sensing the shift in the men around it, before Pruitt himself seemed willing to admit it. This is madness. His voice had gone shrill now, all the oiled confidence stripped away. You'd believe an Apache, and a hysterical widow, over your own mayor. I'd believe proof. A man near the front of the column, Adeline recognized him, as one of the town's older ranchers, a man who'd known Nathaniel well, spoke up now, voice hard. Show us the letter, Mrs. Hargrove. Adeline's hands shook, as she opened the tin box, drew out Nathaniel's letter, and held it high enough for the nearest men to see the handwriting, the date, the careful, deliberate accusations laid out in her dead husband's own hand. Nobody moved for a long moment. Then the rancher swung down off his horse. Walked forward, slow, and took the letter carefully, from Adeline's trembling hands. Read it in silence, jaw tightening with every line. When he finished, he looked up. Not at Adeline. At Pruitt. I've known Nathaniel Hargrove's hand, since he was a boy learning his letters in the same schoolhouse his wife later taught in. His voice carried flat, and final across the flat ground. This is his writing. And this is his accusation. That proves nothing, Pruitt started. It proves enough. The rancher's voice hardened. Enough that I'm not writing one more step on your word, Cyrus. Not today. Not ever again. One by one, other riders began dismounting. Not in anger exactly, in something closer to exhaustion, the particular weariness of men who'd been carrying a lie, so long they'd forgotten how heavy it was, until someone finally set it down in front of them. Pruitt's face had gone the color of old paper. His eyes darted across the column, searching for anyone still willing to back him, and finding, one by one, only backs turned, or eyes lowered. You'll regret this, he said finally, voice low and vicious, no longer performing for anyone. All of you. This town needs me. This town needed water. The rancher's voice was quiet now. Almost tired. And a mayor, who didn't get rich pretending scarcity was somebody else's problem to solve. He turned, addressing the gathered men. There's a spring in the canyon basin. Been feeding these people, a nod toward Tocho's small line of riders, while our own creek ran dry. Maybe it's time we stopped fighting each other, over what little water's left, and started figuring out how to share what's actually there. Murmurs of agreement, hesitant but real, rippled through the crowd. Pruitt's horse shifted beneath him. For a moment, Adeline thought he might simply turn, and run, and some small, tired part of her almost wished he would, wished this could end, without one more ugly scene stretched out under a darkening sky. Instead, his hand moved toward the pistol at his hip. Pruitt. Whitcomb's voice, sharp with warning. Everything happened fast after that. Tocho moved before Adeline's mind had even finished processing the threat, closing the distance between them, and Pruitt's horse in 3 long strides, and by the time Pruitt's pistol had cleared its holster, Tocho's hand had already closed around his wrist, twisting hard enough, that the weapon dropped uselessly, into the dirt. Enough. Tocho's voice was low. Dangerous in a way Adeline had never heard, from him before, not once in 2 weeks of quiet strength, and careful restraint. You've taken enough from this land. From these people. From her. His grip tightened. It ends now. Pruitt's face contorted. Fury, fear, the particular ugliness of a man watching every lie he'd built his life on collapse in front of witnesses he could no longer control. Get your hands off me, he snarled. You savage. Sheriff. The rancher's voice cut through, flat and final, addressing a thin, uncomfortable-looking man near the back of the column, who Adeline recognized, as Ashford Flat's law, the same sheriff Nathaniel's letter had warned her not to trust. You heard the confession. You heard the letter. Do your job, or step aside, and let someone else do it for you. The sheriff hesitated. Looked at Pruitt. Looked at the crowd of men no longer willing to look away. Then, slowly, he dismounted, and walked forward to take Pruitt into custody. Pruitt didn't stop shouting the whole time, threats, accusations, promises of ruin for every man who'd turned against him, but the words had lost whatever power they'd once carried. Just noise now. The last gasp of a man whose whole authority had depended entirely on nobody ever daring to say out loud what everybody had quietly suspected all along. The storm that had been building all morning finally broke, as the column began the long ride back toward Ashford Flat, Pruitt bound and silent between two riders, rain sheeting down cold and clean across land that had gone 3 years, without enough of it to matter. Adeline stood at the canyon mouth, soaked through, watching the column disappear into the gray distance. Tocho came to stand beside her, close enough that his shoulder brushed hers. You did that, he said quietly. All of it. I just stopped a bullet. We did it. She turned to look at him, rain running down both their faces, and something in her chest finally, after 2 years of carrying the weight alone, felt lighter than it had any right to feel yet. Nathaniel started it. I finished it. You made sure I lived long enough to. Tocho was quiet a moment, rain dripping from his dark hair, eyes steady on hers. What happens now? He asked. To you. Your land. All of it. She thought about that. Really thought, for the first time letting herself imagine a future instead of just surviving toward one. The water gets shared, she said slowly. Properly. Fairly. Not because a mayor decides it, but because it's right, and because there are witnesses now, who won't let it be forgotten. A pause. As for my land. She stopped. Looked at him. At the canyon behind him, red and rain-washed, and more like home now than the house she'd shared with Nathaniel had felt in a very long time. I don't know if I want to go back to it, she admitted. Not to live there alone. Not after everything. Tocho's breath caught, just slightly. What are you saying, Adeline? I'm saying. Her voice wavered, then steadied, the way it had steadied 100 times these past 2 weeks against fear far greater than this. I'm saying I came into this canyon as a name pulled out of a box. And somewhere along the way, I stopped being that. She reached up, fingers finding the brass ring still hung around her neck. Nathaniel gave me his protection once. Then he gave his life defending what was ours. A breath. But you gave me something he never got the chance to. You gave me myself back. Tocho reached out, slow, careful, thumb brushing rain from her cheek in a gesture that had nothing left of caution in it. Stay, he said. Simple. The same economy of words she'd learned to trust more than any speech. Not because a law says you belong to me. Because I want you to choose it. I am choosing it. Her voice barely rose above the rain. I have been, I think, since that first night by the fire, when you told me a prisoner has walls, and you had none to give me. Something broke open in his face then, not sorrow this time, but relief so raw it looked almost like pain, years of careful distance finally, fully, undone. He kissed her there in the rain, at the mouth of the canyon, that had swallowed her fear, and given her back something stronger in its place, and the storm rolled on around them, indifferent and cleansing, washing 3 years of drought off land, that was finally, after everything, about to remember how to bloom again. The weeks that followed reshaped Ashford Flat in ways nobody could have predicted the morning that wooden box first appeared in the town square. Pruitt stood trial, before a circuit judge, who arrived a month later, the evidence, Nathaniel's letter, Whitcomb's testimony, the surveyors who'd finally admitted, under oath, exactly whose orders they'd been following, leaving little room for the kind of mercy Pruitt had never once shown anyone else. He was sentenced to hang for the murder of Nathaniel Hargrove, the sentence carried out on a grey morning, that Adeline did not attend, choosing instead to spend, that day at the canyon spring, hands in the cool water, thinking of a man who'd loved her enough to leave a trail even death couldn't erase. The bride lottery was struck, from town record, within the same month, the wooden box itself broken apart, and burned in the square, where it had once stood, no ceremony, no speeches, just a quiet, collective agreement that some things deserved to disappear without comment. And the water that had started it all, the thin, precious thread running beneath red rock, and dry creek bed alike, got shared. Properly this time. A council formed, half from the town, half from what remained of Tocho's people, meeting monthly to divide what little the drought still allowed between two communities, that had spent too many years pretending they weren't drinking, from the same source all along. Adeline sold the house in town, couldn't bring herself to live there again, not with Nathaniel's absence woven into every board of it, and used the money to help rebuild the basin camp instead. New wells, dug with careful hands, and careful hope. A schoolhouse, small but sturdy, where she began teaching again, this time to children, from both sides of a line, that was slowly, stubbornly, starting to blur. The small girl who'd once watched her, from behind an old woman's skirts was the first to raise her hand on the first morning of lessons, and Adeline had to turn away for a moment, before her voice would work again. She kept the ring. Wore it still, some days, not as a widow's burden anymore, but as a thread connecting two men who'd never met properly, and yet had somehow, across 15 years, and one impossible coincidence, saved each other's lives in turn. Autumn came to the canyon eventually, the first real rain in 3 years soaking deep, into red earth, that had almost forgotten what growth felt like. Adeline stood at the cabin door one evening, watching Tocho work near the corral, the same careful, deliberate motions she'd first watched, with fear and now watched, with something that had grown, slow and certain, into love. He didn't look up. But he knew she was there. He always did now, the way a man learns to feel weather changing, before the sky admits to it. The council meets again next week, he said. Neshoba wants you there. Says the town listens differently, when you're the one speaking. Then I'll be there. She crossed the yard, the wind carrying the smell of rain-soaked sage, the first real green starting to push up thin and stubborn between the rocks. And after that? After that. He turned to look at her, firelight from the open cabin door catching gold in his dark eyes. There's a naming, in the spring. Neshoba's granddaughter. He paused. He asked if you'd stand with the family. As one of us. Adeline's throat tightened, warm this time, not grief. As one of us. He reached for her hand, fingers threading through hers, steady and certain the way nothing in her life had felt steady in a very long time. Not the woman a box gave me, he said quietly. The one who chose to stay anyway. Somewhere past the ridge, the last of the day's light slid down behind red stone, that had stood there long, before either of their names had ever meant anything to the other, and would go on standing long after. The wind moved, through the canyon the way it always had, carrying dust and now, finally, the smell of rain, that had come to stay. And Adeline Hargrove, once a name pulled, from a box, once a widow the world had tried to erase, stood at the mouth of a canyon, that had become the only home she still recognized, and understood, at last, that some stories don't end, where fear tries to write them. They begin again. Every single time somebody's brave enough to choose it.